Welcome to MSNBC's special coverage of the New Hampshire primary. I'm Jen Psaki. We're here in Manchester, New Hampshire for what could be the defining contest of the 2024 Republican primary. For Republican voters, there's now just one alternative to an ex-president who incited an insurrection, who faces 91 felony counts in 4 jurisdictions, who said he wants to be dictator for a day, his words, not mine. I mean, I could really go on and on here about Trump's alarming statements in his record, but we don't have all day for that. But the one person left standing in his way is former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Haley spent the morning in Hampton, New Hampshire. Trump did a stop in Londonderry, and his surrogates, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know the one, you know her, and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott are also crisscrossing the state for him, out there campaigning on his behalf. Haley now has that two-person contest she has always wanted, but everything suggests that she is an uphill climb. The last tracking poll out just this morning shows Trump up by 22 points. That's a lot. And over the last few weeks, the Haley campaign has been resetting expectations, because remember, there was a period of time where the thought was after Chris Christie got out, she would gain those votes and she would really start surging. That hasn't exactly happened. And her top surrogate in the state, Governor Chris Sununu, who's been with her at every event, once predicted that she'd win in New Hampshire. Now he says second place is just fine.
At the end of the day, this is a one-on-one race, right? This is Nikki Haley versus Donald Trump. I think she's going to do very well in Iowa. She's going to challenge Trump. I think she wins here in New Hampshire. Of course, she's going to be second.
No one has ever said, close second.
No one has ever said Nikki Haley has to win New Hampshire.
There's kind of a tape for everything, isn't there? Now, part of the message from the Haley campaign today is basically, don't count me out. I'm the alternative to Trump. Turn out, don't count me out. And that she needs to keep building moving forward. And after all, New Hampshire has a bit of a history of stunning primary upsets. John McCain beat George W. Bush here in 2000. 8 years later, Hillary Clinton came from behind and beat Barack Obama. I remember that one very well and very personally. If there is an upset, which as Politico put it, would be, quote, one of the greatest primary upsets in history, in part because of that margin, it will happen because of independent voters who can participate in today's primary, and they could make all the difference. Now, in the last competitive Republican primary in 2016, independents made up more than 40% of the electorate. But typically, during these primaries, you feel something happening on the ground. I mean, I've been here for the last 4 days. A number of the people we'll be talking to have been here for several days, if not longer. Usually feel momentum, the type of momentum that propelled the John McCains of the world to an upset. It's not exactly present here right now at her events. That's not a magical definition, but it is something always to track. The only thing is, the one thing that really matters is what voters have to say. Voters are voting now. Polls are going to start closing today in just 3 hours, so we'll see what they have to say. But the first results are already in. The town of Dixville Notch has been casting the first votes in the First in the Nation primary for 64 years. And at midnight, Nikki Haley swept Donald Trump, winning all of the town's 6 votes. So no matter what happens tonight, she will always have Dixville Notch. And that's where we're going to start our conversation today with MSNBC National Affairs analyst John Heilemann, who's with me here in Manchester. It's also his birthday, although he doesn't want singing, apparently, along with Senator Claire McCaskill, who's here with us. She's the co-host of the MSNBC podcast, How to Win 2024, and 2 NBC News correspondents here in New Hampshire who've been working their tails out on the trail, covering these 2 candidates, Ali Vitale, who's in Pembroke, and Gary Hake, who's in Nashua. So, Ali, I want to start with you, because you're with the Haley campaign. You've been covering them for days, if not longer. Tell us a little bit about how they're feeling tonight. What is the argument that she and her top surrogates are making in the final hours?
Yeah, Jen, it's been days on the ground here in New Hampshire and months that I'm really feeling the weight of today, because this is, frankly, the do-or-die moment for the Haley campaign. That's not the way they're saying it. You played that clip of Governor Chris Sununu there saying Haley was never expected or needed to win here in New Hampshire. But certainly a win would be nice. That's unspoken from the Haley team. But it would lend even more credence to why they're saying they're staying in this race and vowing to go not just through her home state of South Carolina, but all the way through Super Tuesday. And in part, it's because they believe the coalition they're building here, which includes those undeclared or independent voters, can be replicated in other states down the line. Voters like Kathy, who I spoke to here, who are voting for Haley and would love to vote for Haley because they don't know what they'd do in a general election otherwise. Listen.
I voted for Haley
Why?
because I disagree with a lot of what Trump has done. Yes.
You're an independent. Have you ever voted for Trump? No. Have you voted for Biden?
I did.
Would you vote for Biden again in 2024 if it comes down to Trump versus Biden?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe probably Biden then.
So, Jen, that's the way the coalition is coming together, at least here in New Hampshire. And look, this is a bellwether polling place that we are at here within Merrimack County. If you look at the way that the numbers came in 2016 for Trump and Cruz, and we were to lump all of those together, it comes out to around 47%. The other non-Trump Cruz candidates from that 16 cycle come out to about 49%. It's an imperfect science, but it's one that we're looking at as a potential scenario that if Haley were able to cobble together all of those non-Trump, non-Cruz voters, she could theoretically win in key counties like this, and that would be a big deal in the entire state writ large.
It certainly would be. It would be a very big surprise if she won in a lot of those counties, but we're all going to be watching very, very closely. Before I let you go, Allie, she had this memo. You walked through a lot of the details of what the highlights she has in there. She's also been making the case that Trump is the institutional candidate, which is kind of interesting, right? That she's the insurgent in some ways.
Yeah.
What else was stuck out to you in that memo, or kind of the spin you're hearing from the Haley team at this point?
There were a few things that stuck out to me in that memo, specifically because it's yet another example of the Haley team digging in their heels. I think one of the phrases that her campaign manager, Betsy Ankeny, used in the memo was basically saying, hey, everybody take a deep breath. We're only 2 states in, and we've got a long way to go here down the stretch. They're arguing that states like Michigan and Virginia and Texas are places that Haley is going to be able to play well. In part, they're arguing because of her actual message and the momentum they feel they're building, even though she's yet to win a state and they can't detail which one that would be. I think that's a real problem if you're saying you're making a delegate strategy and not being able to win a state and still trying to contest for the nomination. But they also have the backing. What's unsaid in that memo is the backing of the Koch-backed group that endorsed Haley earlier this year. They are fanned out at the grassroots level, already knocking on doors, sort of doing the advance work for Haley in those Super Tuesday states. And so it is Haley's game to play within her campaign. They're focusing on the next states in the calendar, but they've already got folks on the ground focusing on what's ahead. She's got donor trips and donor visits booked throughout February. All of that, again, lends to the idea that she is staying in this race as the Trump alternative. Of course, the former president, no fan of that. And we know from Garrett's reporting, he is definitely not going to make that an easy one, but still, she's doing it.
We will see. You're doing it until you're not doing it, is always my experience. So we'll see what the outcome is of tonight. Feels like it will have a big impact. Allie, we will let you get back to reporting. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, we're going to bring in Garrett now, because Garrett has been covering the Trump team, been to more Trump campaign events than most people. Tell us how the campaign sees the primary tonight. They clearly want to lock it up if they can.
Yeah, Jen, and they do think they can. They are optimistic that they might be able to knock Nikki Haley out of this race. If not tonight, then in the next couple of days. They've been telegraphing for a week now that if she does decide to stay in this race after tonight, they're going to make her life miserable in the lead up to South Carolina, really through Nevada, which has its caucuses next. But in the lead up to South Carolina, they're going to continue to do things like what they did in New Hampshire this week, which is bring a lot of their South Carolina endorsers on the road with Donald Trump and parade them in front of national media and try to highlight basically how isolated they have been able to make Nikki Haley within the core of the Republican Party. I mean, to Allie's point about the undeclared voters, the folks who are not necessarily traditional Republicans, the Trump people basically say, yeah, that's great that you have that, but here in the party that's determining the nominee, we're going to basically freeze you out. And they're going to be continuing to do that over the next couple of weeks. Now, this is my 4th New Hampshire primary, which makes me feel very old to say out loud, but I've felt that momentum when it exists, Jen, that you were talking about in the open of the show. And to the degree that I can feel it here in New Hampshire, it tends to be actually more towards Trump. I know that's not what a lot of people want to hear, but you see it in the tracking polls, you see it in the data, and you do see it in some of these Republicans who might have been Ron DeSantis supporters, or perhaps supportive earlier on of someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, who dropped out after Iowa, who are coming home to Trump just as much as sort of the Chris Christie, soft, maybe like Biden supporting Republicans are coming home to Nikki Haley. That's the dynamic that the Trump team is watching. And as they look ahead to South Carolina and beyond to Super Tuesday, when a lot of these states become winner-take-all states, a strategy of, moral victories and close second places becomes less and less effective the further they get down the line. And they feel like they're built to apply that pressure over the next couple of weeks.
I know, Garrett, first of all, John Heileman's laughing about your 4 New Hampshire primaries. He's probably covered a few more than that, maybe,
Sure.
I think.
40.
40.
At this point, 40, I can say on my birthday, I haven't done 40 of them.
Approximately 40, but 4 is still a lot. I did, Garrett, want to ask you about their strategy as it relates to Biden, because if they want to make this seem inevitable, which is clearly their strategy, they're gathering all these surrogates to stand with him. If they're going to make Nikki Haley's life a living hell, what are they going to do to Biden starting tomorrow? What do they say about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's an open question. I mean, they continue to attack Joe Biden on a variety of issues. I was at this gaggle with Donald Trump outside a polling place earlier. He made it pretty clear he wants to continue to go after him on the border. It's always interesting to watch Trump kind of adjust to news of day in real time. He's de-emphasized the economy. He's de-emphasized inflation over the last couple of weeks as the economy, stock market numbers keep going up, the inflation numbers keep going down. Now he's back on the border, which has always been kind of a key issue for him going back to 2015. He's re-emphasizing it again. And as it relates to the Haley part of the conversation, too, I asked Donald Trump about how do you get Nikki Haley's voters, folks who might have voted for him in 2020, back into the tent in 2024. And his answer to me, while somewhat convoluted, basically was, we're going to have Joe Biden do that for us. It is an article of faith on the Republican side that Joe Biden's low approval numbers will push Republicans, even like the folks that Ali interviewed, back onto the Trump train because they just won't be able to stomach Joe Biden. So they seem to think kind of world events can do some of the work for them here, especially around the border. But as the economic numbers go up, that messaging becomes much harder for Trump down the line.
Garrett, thank you so much. Thank you for attending all the events and telling us what's happening at them. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let me turn to you. It's because we don't know what's going to happen tonight. We could see different margins. We'll talk about it as it develops. But there's a question, a strategic question Trump's going to have to figure out with his campaign, how they run the campaign from here if they feel they're moving into a general election. It's a different electorate.
Yeah, I mean, a different electorate and a different world. I mean, they will stay focused on we'll see what the crucial thing in this memo. She says she's going to stay until Super Tuesday. I appreciated your doubt about that. One of the things about having a full calendar and donor calls and all that stuff is if you remove those from your calendar, you're signaling to everyone that you're dropping out of the race. So even for someone who says, I have a withdrawal speech written for Wednesday morning, you still are not going to move anything in your calendar. So there's nothing about the memo that says she's going to stay until Super Tuesday, the fact that she saw the calendar of events.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis said he was in till South Carolina, I think.
As you said, you were in until the moment that you're out. It's like the deal, like no deal is done until all the parts of the deal are done. I think, they will stay focused on her, the Trump campaign will, until she is gone. And I think that it helps him, given the way that he has run his general election strategies have been base focused strategies also. Now, whether that's a smart strategy or not, I don't know. But he has, I think that it's good for him in this period when he faces all these legal challenges, where he wants to be able to get through as much as he can of that, try to push as much of it off past the election as he can, and keep his base riled up behind him. For that purpose, Nikki Haley's great news. Keeping her around.
A great fodder for him.
Keeping her
great
around.
Great foil, I should say.
Yes, I mean, there's nothing about going into South Carolina that worries Donald Trump. Donald Trump would like Nikki Haley to stay in this race and let him beat her again. I mean, again, assuming he wins tonight, we're not making passing judgment, but if he does win tonight, a strong victory, he'd be happy to have her go down there and then humiliate her in her home state. That would only be good for him from the standpoint that he would like to, I would imagine, and on the basis of talking to some people in that world, he wants to basically run that base strategy long after the nomination fight is over and try to get through to the convention where he's just continuing to consolidate that base. He looks at President Biden and says, he has problems with his base. I need to go into the general election with my base fired up. I don't want to have that problem. I can start to compete for persuadable voters when we get to the fall and see where things are. But I know that the Trump campaign looks at Biden and says he's got problems with African-American voters. He's got problems with Latinos. He's got problems with young voters. Let's make sure that by the time we get to Labor Day, we don't have any problems with our base after all is said and done.
So run up his margins.
Run up his margins, show that he dominates the Republican Party, show that get this consolidated Republican Party around him, show that Nikki Haley's right. She is the insurgent right now. He is the Republican Party. He is the established order. He wants to try to take advantage of that as much as possible and demonstrate to everyone in Republican politics that he is the dominant figure in the party, and then start to worry, if he's going to worry at all, about those voters on the margins that he's going to need to actually win the election.
He probably needs to, because he's got to expand from 2020. So, Claire, let me go to you and kind of where the Haley campaign would be coming at this from tonight. I mean, there's lots of things that could happen. Things happen that are surprising. We were just talking about how Hillary Clinton was behind by several points. She ended up winning by a couple points. We all remember that well back in 2008. But you have to, within a campaign, as we all know, you're kind of mapping out different options, right? You're mapping out, we lose by 15, what do we do? We lose by 10, what do we do? We win, what do we do? That's pretty clear. You stay in the race. What do you think those conversations are like in the Haley campaign right now, Claire?
Well, if she does a decent job tonight, and by that I mean if she loses by less than 10, then her money will keep flowing. So this really is a decision as to whether or not she can survive much longer and whether it makes any sense for her and her family and her donors and being embarrassed in her own state. But I mean, I agree with what John just said, but I would look at it a little differently. I think there's two Republican parties right now. Donald Trump is the new Republican Party, and he is going to consolidate the base of the new Republican Party. And I think that's probably 60 to 70% of the people who call themselves Republicans. But there's another 25 or 30%, and that's the Nikki Haley party. And those are people, many of whom have said clearly they will never vote for Donald Trump. Those are the voters that Joe Biden needs to be looking at. He needs to find them, find the Haley voters tonight in New Hampshire, and model his campaign, because for him to win in November, he's got to grab all the old Republican Party that is still with Nikki Haley from the new Republican Party that is all Donald Trump and MAGA and all of the things that so many of us find repugnant. So it is time for the Biden campaign to begin focusing not just on getting the base where they need to be, and I'm confident they will, but really working on those voters that used to call themselves Republican but don't anymore.
Claire, the RNC is out with a statement that says, quote, the Republican primary is up to the voters, and we've never had a Republican nominee who did not win at least Iowa or New Hampshire. If President Trump comes out strong tonight, that's a clear message being sent from our primary voters. Another message we're hearing is unity from President Trump, Governor DeSantis, and Senator Scott. Republicans know that if we're not united as a party behind our nominee, we won't be able to beat Biden. That's why we had our candidates sign the Beat Biden pledge to be on our debate stage. Unity is key. I didn't realize it was that long, but the point is they're basically saying Trump is the presumptive nominee. I mean, Nikki Haley is up against that. We've seen that come from the party committee chairman. We've seen a number of surrogates here in state. What do you do with that if you're Nikki Haley in the Haley campaign?
Well, you ignore it because, frankly, not very many voters care much about what the RNC says. I think you ignore it. You know, those are all the party hacks. Yes, of course, they're for Donald Trump. He controls the party. He controls the money. I'm out here fighting for the values that you care about, not the values necessarily of Donald Trump. Now, she started too late going after him. She thought she could beat him by just kind of hanging around. But keep in mind, those people who dropped out so far, only Chris Christie was in her party. The Ramaswamy and DeSantis were just mini-me's of Trump. They were clearly in the Trump party, not the Nikki Haley party. So the RNC is the Trump party, and that's where they're going to be, and they're going to put out things like that. But frankly, I'm not aware of anybody in America who cares what either the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee say.
I know. Nobody's pressing refresh on their websites, it turns out.
Yeah.
Claire and John are sticking around. We'll talk about that in terms of what Nikki Haley should have done better, could have done better. I know John's done a lot of reporting on that as well. Also, when we come back, more from our team across the state of New Hampshire. Jacob Soboroff is at a polling location. That will be fun, and will show us why the Granite State is unlike any other primary state he's covered, and he's covered a lot of them. And we'll also try and unpack what Republican voters could really be feeling about Donald Trump if he becomes the party's nominee. Plus, President Biden teaming up with Vice President Kamala Harris on this election day. A big rally this hour in Virginia, part of their nationwide tour, hoping to fire up voters about the dangers of the growing restrictions to abortion in this country. All those stories and more when MSNBC's special coverage of the New Hampshire primary continues after this. We'll be right back. you decided who you're going to support on Tuesday?
Yes, I think I have. I think I'm a Nikki supporter.
And when did you make your decision?
Just in the last couple of weeks.
And what put you over the edge?
I certainly don't want Trump back in the White House. I think he's a disaster. I think he brings chaos and a lot of negativity, and he's a threat to our democracy. And I think Nikki has the right approach. I think she's a unifier, and I think she'll bring rationality back to the White House.
Whatever hope there is inside the Nikki Haley campaign right now that there really is a pathway to victory today or something close enough to it to stay in the race rests in part on the shoulders of people like Gary, who you just saw there. New Hampshire voters starve for rationality atop the Republican ticket, as he just said. And this week, our NBC News colleague Jacob Sobroff returned to New Hampshire and connected with voters who he'd come to know in elections past, like ice fisherman Michael Quinn. See if what he had to say sounds familiar.
How's life been since I saw you last?
As far as expenses, things get more expensive now, which is bad.
With warmer weather dramatically shortening ice fishing season.
This is the worst year I've seen it, actually. So It seems like it's getting worse every year.
Climate change?
Perhaps, yeah. Very frustrating, yeah.
Michael told us he ended up voting for Trump in 2016.
Back when, if you remember back, I called him a spectacle, right? And he continues to be a spectacle.
Then Biden in 2020.
I'm not too happy about that either. Honestly, he hasn't done anything good for me.
DeSantis is out.
Yep.
You don't love Biden.
Yeah.
You're faced with Trump and Haley.
Well, she seems to be a go-getter, and maybe it's time to give a new candidate a try.
Let's bring in NBC's Jacob Soboroff. He's in Derry, New Hampshire now. He's been out talking to swing voters today. Claire and John are also back with us as well. So, Jacob, first of all, tell us, I love your friendship with Michael, first of all. I hope you stay in touch with him for many elections to come.
Too.
I'm sure you will. You do. You text and things, I think. So tell us a little bit more about the voters you're talking to in Derry. What are you hearing? Are you hearing similar things to what Michael was telling you?
Michael, for me, is sort of emblematic of so many of the people that I've met here, Jen, over the years and sort of along the way. He speaks his mind. He doesn't vote with one party over another. He's part of this really extraordinary process where you can show up at a place like Pinkerton Academy here in Derry as an unaffiliated voter, decide to vote Republican, and by the time you're out of here, actually unregister, change back to become an unaffiliated voter again, or Democrat. I was in Durham also earlier today talking to students on the shuttle bus in Durham. Those guys, I have to tell you, showed to me some troubling signs for President Biden. And the reason that I say that is so many of them were there on the bus to participate on the Democratic side of the ledger, but many of them didn't want to actually write in President Biden's name. Some of them said they wanted to write in ceasefire in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza and against U.S. policy towards Israel and the war with Hamas. They also told me they would vote for some of the other candidates. So it's always a unique window. It's always an interesting process. It's so different from everywhere else. And there really is nothing like being here, Jen. And if I could, I just want to introduce you to somebody. I think she's still here. Hey,
Please.
Tina, come on back. Jen, come with me. This is Tina. Tina's the town clerk here in Derry. Am I right?
We're with you.
Okay, so thank you. Here's the deal, Tina. We're live with Jen Psaki right now on MSNBC. I'm curious. This is one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the largest, Jen says hi, one of the largest polling places in not only in New Hampshire, but potentially the country. Around 20,000 people could be registered and eligible to participate here?
Yep, they are. We are definitely the largest in New Hampshire, and honestly, New Hampshire is what I pay attention to.
They don't, they call it like it is in New Hampshire, Jen. Tina, how many people have participated today?
So we've had about 6,700 voters come through. I'm expecting a big rush here at the end from now until 8 p.m. Polls are open until 8. 6,700.
So we're talking about 30, I'm not good at math, but 30-something% of the overall total, right?
Yes.
Do you know how many have gone from unaffiliated to Republican and then back?
We won't know that until tomorrow.
But I would imagine it's a large number because I've been watching the Change Back station all day, and people are going to change back after switching to one party or another. Okay, Tina, I'll let you go. Tina's got an important job, Jen, so I'm going to let you get back to your gig. But thank you very much. We'll check in with you throughout the night, okay?
Have a great night.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Tina. So, Jen, it's all part of the process. And when I say it's all part of the process, I mean this unique thing about being able to be not attached to one party or another, and then being able to switch and switch back before you actually walk out of the door here. It's really awesome to see.
It's really interesting. I mean, I met a couple of voters today at a polling place in Manchester who were registered, had changed so that they could vote for Nikki Haley, some of them, in order to be opposed to Donald Trump. There were a range of different people outside. It's a fascinating process here. Now, Jacob, let me ask you about those people you met on the bus, because, you know, I've heard some of that as well here. In addition to being concerned about wanting to write in ceasefire, I should say, I've met some of those as well. Were there other concerns they had? I've heard the border from a couple of people. Were there other topics that came up that they were concerned about?
Democrats, particularly the young Democrats, the ones I was talking to on the bus, really had more than anything concerns about sort of the viability of President Biden as a candidate, whether or not he would, you know, his age obviously being the sort of the top thing that continued to come up, but also just relatability to young people like the ones I was talking to on the bus in Derry. Among older folks and older voters, I've heard a lot of people say they're going to come in here today and write in his name. And then just on the process side of all that, it's going to be so interesting to watch because throughout the state, most of the polls close at 7. Here in Derry and some other places, I think in Nashua, correct me if I'm wrong, they close at 8. This could be a bit of a slower count on the Democratic side because they have to actually hand count those President Biden votes because they're write-in ballots. So I think we will get, from a facility like this, a quicker return on the Republican side because they're optical scan machines where the bubbles are filled in and that you get the tabulations right away. But on the Democratic side, it could be a minute before we know sort of exactly how many write-in votes the president ultimately gets tonight.
Be something to watch. We'll be here till 2 a.m., so hopefully before then. Jacob, thank you so much for your reporting and for introducing us to some new friends on the ground. So let me go to you. We were talking a little bit during the break and earlier just about Nikki Haley, and we don't, again, know what's going to happen tonight, but there's been some acknowledgement, even by her supporters, that they wish she would have gone harder a little earlier. You did some reporting this morning. What is your view on all of this?
Well, I think there's over this whole weekend, they're talking to a lot of traditional New Hampshire Republicans, the Krista Noonan Republicans who care about democracy, don't like the idea of a budding autocrat being the party's nominee, would like to get back to some older version of that, whether that's the John McCain version, the George W. Bush version, any of those kind of prior incarnations, the Bob Dole version even. And you know, they look at her and say, overwhelmingly, there's the sentiment of, I wish the Nikki Haley we saw this weekend, we'd seen her a month ago or 6 months ago. That, you know, she wasn't necessarily as tough with Trump as they would have liked, but she started to loosen up. There started to be some spontaneity. You started to see packed schedules where she was really on the ground. She wasn't interacting enough with voters, but she's starting to do that a little bit. She started to, obviously, she decided to go after Trump on this one issue related when he made it the screw up and confused her with Nancy Pelosi. But that's sort of, it's not even about the attacks, as she seemed pathologically cautious. And pathologically cautious, she's right, I said before, when she says she's the insurgent and he's the establishment. He's the dominant one. And Claire's thing, the Trump party is the 60% party. She's the 30% party. But she's the insurgent. But she's not campaigned with the insurgent spirit. This is a campaign, a place that values that. Turning down the debate, the WMUR ABC News debate, when she could have reached the whole state who doesn't necessarily know her that well, not taking questions from voters, kind of campaigning as if she was protecting a lead for many months. That would have naturally led her, if she'd been more spirited, to go after Trump more. But more, it would have just been, she wouldn't have seemed so cautious. Mike Murphy, a longtime Republican strategist who helped John McCain win here in 2000, said that she reminded him of the old Russian proverb, which is, she seems like she's trying to wash the bear without getting its fur wet.
An underused proverb, I would say.
Underused, but a very apt one in this case. And that's sort of how she's taken on Trump. You can't wash the bear without getting the bear's fur wet. And she seemed to not, she was just walking on eggshells through a lot of this. That is not a style of campaigning that New Hampshire has traditionally rewarded on the Democratic or the Republican side.
Now, that's true. I mean, in New Hampshire, people in New Hampshire, they really want somebody to be a fighter. They like the insurgent. It is funny that Trump surrounded himself with establishment Republicans, many from Washington, which is part of her point. Claire, let me ask you this. I'm a little sympathetic, I would say, to some of these Republican candidates who have been running against Trump, dare I say, because it's tricky, this messaging. I mean, you're a little damned if you do, damned if you don't. Look at Chris Christie. He went hard after Trump. He ended up with net negative polling numbers. Nikki Haley walked a much more careful line, as John was just outlining. She's kind of the last survivor, so maybe she ran a bit of a good strategy on that front. What should she have shifted earlier? Would it have mattered? What's your view?
Well, I'm just old-fashioned about this. I don't think you beat somebody who has an incumbent status by ignoring them. You don't beat somebody who is winning by ignoring them. There's a reason why negative campaigns are everywhere. It's because they work. Everybody hates negative ads. Everybody says, oh, they always just say to me, quit running negative ads. Well, I got news for everybody. They run them because they work. And I got to tell you, I also have to give a shout out to Tina. You know, I think everybody needs to remember when any of our folks on the ground interview people like Tina, she is running the election there. Yeah. That is who Trump wants you to believe is the deep state. He wants you to believe that Tina is out there with some evil motive to try to deter people from having their voices heard. It is so ludicrous. Tina and thousands of others like her across this country administer elections in the most fair and even-handed way in the world. And I just wanted to do that because as I watched her talk, I knew how busy she was. I know how hard she's working. And that's who Trump wants to make an enemy to people in America. And it just makes me sick to my stomach.
It's such an important point, Claire. And I met some amazing poll workers this morning, too, who had been working there for decades. They play such an essential role. If Jacob, give Tina a big shout out and hug from all of us. John Heilemann,
I just say, I think you put your finger on something really important because it's, you know, if the party is a third of them love Trump, a third of them like Trump, but might be persuadable, and a third of them are hate Trump, right? The Chris Christie strategy of you know, calling him a constitutional vandal and a budding autocrat, you're not going to be the Republican nominee in that party with that kind of composition. You had to figure out, it's really tricky, that thing of how do you, someone said a year ago that the way you had to deal with Trump was to praise Trump before you bury him. And that sounds really good, but in practice, it's really hard to do.
Very tricky.
And figuring out the messaging where you're like, you get all those people who hate him, but in that middle third, who are like, they basically like him, but how do you persuade them that, you know, you're with him, but maybe his time has passed? Man, you gotta have a very high degree of political skill to pull that off.
I feel like there's a Russian proverb for it. We're gonna have to ask Mike Mercatore.
Does it involve bears?
I don't know, we'll see.
And fur?
On that note, John Heilemann, happy birthday here in New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us.
Happy birthday, Heilemann. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. There you go.
She's singing.
I sang.
I'm
Just
not going to join.
Want me to, I sang.
I got Claire to sing. Like, wait a minute. Let's do the whole thing, Claire. Crank the whole thing out.
No. I can't do the Wu-Tang version.
Well, I'm not joining because I want people to tune in after the break, and we're going to take one very shortly. Right now, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are set to fire up a crowd in Virginia campaigning for abortion rights. We'll take you there next and look at why Democrats say it's a top issue for voters this year, as it was in 2022. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Some of the biggest issues for me around women's rights and what's been happening there.
Would you mind sharing who you cast your ballot for today?
I did a write-in for Joe Biden.
For Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Why was it important to show up and write his name in today?
Because I think he's been a great president.
We're looking at live pictures of the first campaign rally of 2024 for President Biden and Vice President Harris. And he's showing up in force. The Vice President, First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff are all with him this hour in Virginia. And what is quite telling is the topic they are focused on, abortion rights. Just a few months ago, Governor Glenn Youngkin promised to pass an abortion ban if Republicans took control of the legislature. And that promise helped Democrats take back the State House this past November. The Biden campaign is hoping that abortion rights will be an issue that propels voters to the polls again this November. And at least 12 states will have ballot initiatives on abortion access, which also means that people who may not be excited about voting might get themselves out to vote. This is all a part of a series of events by the Biden campaign emphasizing the critical fight to regain abortion access centered around the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision yesterday. Joining our conversation is the president of Reproductive Freedom for All, Minnie Tamaraju. She's outside Biden and Harris's abortion rally in Manassas, Virginia. Claire is also back with us. So, Minnie, I know you have the vice president speaking behind you, but we're so excited to hear your thoughts. Now, to me, it's a pretty strong signal about the importance of abortion rights this year, that this is how they are starting this big unified event with these 4 big players of the Biden administration. Talk to us a little bit about the impact of that, as well as these ballot initiatives and how powerful they could be in your view.
You know, this is such an important way to start this campaign. You just talked about Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. No one did it better than Virginia Democrats last cycle. You know, they took the millions of dollars Glenn Youngkin spent. And, you know, he was really trying to stake out that moderate middle ground for the GOP on abortion, and they repudiated it. They put it to bed. And for the president and the vice president to be drawing this incredibly clear contrast, look behind me, it says restore Roe. What they will do versus what Donald Trump has been bragging about doing, overturning Roe, it's an incredibly powerful message. And the ballot initiative strategy feeds right into this really well, but it's important to note in states the ballot initiative strategy is attracting Republicans and independents as well, and that's something that I think is up for grabs for Biden and Harris.
It's such an important point. And Claire, I mean, you ran in Missouri, you won in Missouri, you've been in politics for a long time, and abortion was described as a wedge issue not that long ago. It's clearly not, given where polls are with the majority of people in this country and what Minnie just mentioned, independents, even Republicans. Talk to us a little bit about how important this issue is, how much you think it should be a part of candidates' campaign message and even their stump speeches in the next 10 months.
Well, you know, this is an issue where the vast majority of Americans agreed with Roe. They were comfortable with a restriction around viability, but they also feel very strongly about reproductive freedom. And by the way, this is where Biden can make up ground. He can make up ground with independent voters. He can make up ground with suburban women. He can make up ground with Republican voters who feel strongly about this. And there's a wide swath of them that do. This is a smart strategy. Basically, the dog caught the bus, and now the bus is in the process of running over the dog, because America is not going to put up with women going back 50 years in terms of their freedoms. My state is going to have an IP on the ballot. Hopefully, they're gathering signatures right now that would also return to a viability, a Roe v. Wade standard. I think that is very much in the majority, and I think it will help Joe Biden. I think it's smart to open the campaign this way.
I love the bus running back over the dog. I've never heard that part of the analogy. I'm going to definitely steal that from you, Claire. So, Minnie, I think one of the questions right now is, how do you message about this in the most powerful way? Obviously, doing this campaign event is a good one. I think these personal stories is so powerful and so important. I spoke yesterday with Dr. Austin Dennard, who's a Texas OBGYN, who is featured in an ad the campaign released yesterday. She's talking about her own personal experience and kind of the impact on her. I think those personal stories are going to be a big part of kind of reaching out to voters and reaching out to women. Minnie, what do you think about the importance of that as kind of the leading driving message here?
You know, the longer these abortion bans are in place in these 21 states with bans and restrictions, the more and more of these horror stories like Dr. Dennard, Amanda Zarowski, Kate Cox, but also Brittany Watts in Ohio, the more these stories are coming out and penetrating in the public consciousness. The longer the bans are in effect, the more stories we're going to have. It makes every American feel like they know somebody who's been impacted, and they do, right? This issue's been in the shadows for so long and been stigmatized for so long. It's so powerful to have these women make these stories. In fact, Amanda Zarowski is about to join the stage right now and tell her story. It's a really smart strategy, but it's also core to the Joe Biden ethos. He's an empathetic leader, and we need to hear more of that empathy from our leaders. And it's a winning message, and it's authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think the personal stories over data is so important for people to remember. Claire, let me go back to you, because last week, your home state, Missouri, a state you've won in before, launched a ballot initiative. I mentioned ballot initiatives at the top here. They launched one around abortion rights. They raised over $1 million in the first 24 hours, a lot of money. Again, it's just one of 12 states where abortion will or is likely to appear on the ballot. How energizing do you think that could be in a state like Missouri and a number of the states that everybody can see on that map right now, that many of which are key for President Biden?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. This is going to be expensive. It's going to take $5 million just to gather the signatures to get it on the ballot. Then the opponents are going to come into a state like Missouri misrepresenting what this does. They're going to say it's all about making late-term and taxpayer-funded abortions prevalent in Missouri, which is just not true. So it's a battle. I think it's a battle that can be won. Polling shows it can be won. And if it can win in Missouri, it can win anywhere because we have the most extreme laws in the country. No exceptions for rape or incest. Most Missourians don't even know how extreme our laws are. So that's one thing that will happen in this campaign. They will begin to realize how limited people's rights are in Missouri now. And Missourians typically don't like the government telling them what to do, especially when it comes to a personal, private decision like reproductive health.
Well, this is certainly the government telling you what to do on a pretty personal level. Minnie Tamaraju had to leave. She's at the rally. Claire McCaskill, thank you so much for hanging with me this hour. I enjoyed speaking with you. And coming up next, we'll break from New Hampshire for just a moment. A legal loss for the ex-president in the election interference case. Some breaking news that happened this afternoon. We'll bring that back, that development to you next. In a pretty big blow to former President Donald Trump this afternoon, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has denied his request to rehear his appeal of the gag order imposed on him by Judge Tanya Chutkan in the federal election interference case. The appeal was automatically denied after not a single judge requested a vote on Trump's motion. His only hope now is to appeal to the Supreme Court. We're still waiting to hear from that same appeals court on Trump's claim of presidential immunity in that case as well. But joining us now to explain it all is former top official with the Justice Department and MSNBC legal analyst, Andrew Weissman. Andrew, thank you so much for being here with me on Election Day. I just wanted to start with the fact that not a single judge requested a vote, which feels to a non-lawyer like me significant. But what does that tell you about the weakness of the case, about Trump's clear potential desire to try to get the Supreme Court to take this case up?
Sure. Well, this, having just watched you and Claire, this might be the legal equivalent of her analogy to the bus and the dog, because this is basically.
Keep it going.
Yeah, exactly. This is, you know, he lost the first time around by a panel of D.C. judges. That's 3 judges. And as is his right, he asked whether the full court of 11 full-time sitting judges would hear it, and they said no. The fact that no one of the judges asked for a vote to record, how the vote went doesn't necessarily mean that it was unanimous, but it definitely is a sign of the weakness of the case. It could be that one of those judges who didn't necessarily agree with the decision understood that there were not enough votes and there was no reason to have a vote. It also could be because of their concern about security. It's very well known that Judge Chutkan has been threatened, and in fact, someone has been charged with threatening her life. And so there was no need to sort of name names and for them to all stand together. But it isn't a good sign for Donald Trump that there wasn't anybody who was willing to say, we disagree with this, we want to vote, we do want people to put their names to it. And, I don't think that this is one where the Supreme Court's going to hear it. They have enough on their plate coming from Donald Trump. Yeah. They're about to have oral argument on February 8th in connection with the Colorado case about whether he's qualified or not qualified to appear on the Colorado ballot.
I mean, they do have a full docket, I think it's fair to say, of Trump things. I never thought of the concern of the threat, but given the rise in swatting against people in the judiciary, that certainly makes sense. It's an interesting point. Well, while we have you, I did want to ask you about the immunity case, because we're still waiting also for a ruling from this same court. Do we have any sense of when that might come or what we can expect on that front?
Well, Mary and I on our podcast have, actually said we thought it would have come out by now. So, no one knows when it's going to come out. But, our betting is that it's any day now. Remember, they, like the Supreme Court, they have expedited hearing on this case because the judicial system is trying to sort of catch up and be giving decisions in real time, understanding that there's sort of a unique threat posed by Donald Trump on so many different fronts. There's so many legal issues that he is sort of throwing out, whether it's the Colorado case, whether it's immunity, whether it's the gag order. And so they expedited hearing this case. So it's hard to imagine that they expedited hearing the case, had briefs coming in over the Christmas and New Year holidays, and then they're going to sit on this. You know, if I had to guess as to why it's taken a couple weeks, it's because it's not one judge who is ruling, it's three. And that means that there's coordination. They may be wanting to make sure that they can reach unanimity on certain issues. And so that, I think, is a factor that people should take into account.
Well, we'll all be waiting. It doesn't work this way, but if they wanted to bury it, the night of the New Hampshire primary might be an interesting one. That's not how the process works. Andrew Weissman, thank you as always for joining us this afternoon. And much more to come here in Manchester. The final polls close in New Hampshire in just about 3 hours. And coming up in the next hour, our first snapshot of what was on voters' minds today as they went to vote. Steve Kornacki live at the big board. Where else would he be with the first exit polling of the night? MSNBC's special coverage continues after this, so don't go anywhere. Hi again, everyone. I'm Jen Psaki. It's 5 o'clock here in Manchester, New Hampshire, as we continue MSNBC's special coverage of the first in the nation primary. Final polls close statewide in just 3 hours as the last remaining challenger to Donald Trump for the Republican presidential nomination, Nikki Haley, is hoping for an upset. Following the ex-president's overwhelming victory in Iowa last week, New Hampshire's primary could essentially be the last stand before he becomes the presumptive nominee, something that has never happened this early in an election cycle when the candidate is not a sitting president. If Haley pulls off a win tonight or comes very close, it would give her a real sense of momentum heading into the primary in her home state of South Carolina, a state where she is significantly behind Donald Trump. But if Trump is victorious, the pressure on his former UN ambassador to drop out will certainly intensify. Haley, who has already said she will not drop out even if she does not win tonight, needs a strong showing, though you never say you're going to drop out until you drop out. So we will see. And New Hampshire could be her best bet. New Hampshire's a state with a streak of independence. Live free or die is the motto, after all, here, where undeclared voters make up the biggest segment of the electorate. And today, voters have been showing up all across the state. New Hampshire's Secretary of State is predicting over 300,000 votes will be cast in the Republican primary, an increase from the 287,000 cast in 2016. So here's a taste of New Hampshire Republican voters that I got a chance to speak with today.
I voted for Donald Trump. Working was a bit difficult, keeping a job or even finding a job. And I was comparing that to when Donald Trump was in office. I'm not going to say he did everything perfectly because things were still bad.
I voted for Nikki Haley.
It sounds like it was an anti-Trump vote, less than a...
Yeah. I just didn't want a president that seemed like we would have more problems than we would not have problems.
The Haley coalition could be interesting, depending how she does tonight. We'll talk about that with our amazing group in just a moment. We'll have results from exit polls very soon, and Steve Kornacki will join us to go through them as well. But first, we head out to our reporters on the ground. And we're going to begin with Shaq Brewster. He's in Milford, New Hampshire, and Dasha Burns is in Nashua, just down the street from Trump's primary night headquarters. So, Shaq, let me start with you. You've been talking to voters all day and all week. What are they telling you? I heard one of the people you spoke with earlier said that Dixville Notch votes helped them cast their vote for Haley. That's pretty amazing, the power of the 6 voters in Dixville Notch. But what else are you hearing out there today?
Yeah. Hi there, Jen. Well, look, I am very shocked, and I've been surprised by how many voters have told me that they were undecided up to maybe even this morning. One person saying that he went on Facebook, saw some news about the stock market, and that is how he made his decision. Another said that when they got into the voting booth, that is when they ultimately decided which way they were going to go. And, of course, it gives you a sense of why you have both campaigns really pounding the pavement up to the last minute, really. You saw Donald Trump, for example, today appear at a voting location outside, meeting with supporters. Nikki Haley having a slew of events up until yesterday. And one thing that we've really been hearing is that these voters have been paying attention. They know who's there. One person said that they were planning on voting for Ron DeSantis until Sunday and then had to scramble and do research all over again to figure out who they were going to support. I want you to listen to a little bit of some of my conversations with voters throughout the course of the day.
I don't think Mr. Trump is perfect, but I think he's more able to influence people.
I like Trump. I voted for him the first time and the second time. And I wouldn't mind. He did good things when he was there. But his attitude and his verbal talk is what kind of...
That's why you voted for Haley?
Yeah.
Anything but Trump.
That was your priority?
That's my priority.
Is that the biggest reason you supported Nikki Haley?
Yeah, I'd say.
Because of Donald Trump?
Yes, yeah. And I have no problem with the ladies running things. I have one here.
Of course, he's pointing to his wife in that last interview.
Yes.
There. It was very funny.
I have no problem with ladies
one big
running
other
things.
factor is as he stares at his wife, you could tell they've been talking about that for some time. I'll tell you another big
They
factor
may have
here,
a
of course,
conversation in
are
the
those
car.
undeclared
We'll see.
those undeclared or independent voters who can pick up whichever ballot they decide to choose. They come in, they go and check in, show their ID, and the clerk literally says to them, do you want the Democratic ballot or Republican ballot? That could shift things, and that is something that Nikki Haley has been trying to build her coalition around, leaning in on getting those independents to show up to the polls. We'll see in a couple of hours of how much that worked.
Shaq, we'll keep hearing from you on all your conversations with voters. They're always interesting. Dasha, you've been covering DeSantis, you've been covering Nikki Haley, you've been at millions of events. You're now at Nashua High School. Tell us what's there, what you've been hearing from voters, and what you're kind of expecting over the next few hours.
So, Jen, we've been bouncing around a couple of different polling locations that are all pretty bellwether places that reflected in 2016 the statewide outcome, right, which Trump won by about 34%, which means in these areas, like where I am here in Nashua, I was in Goffstown earlier today, these are areas that aren't hardcore MAGA country. This is where a lot of folks back in 2016 voted for more moderate candidates like Rubio, Bush, and the like. So these are the places where she has some opportunity, but where she really needs to run up her margin. She needs to be getting 50, 51% or so in places like this if she wants to try to slow or stop Trump's march to the nomination. What's complicated here are all of these factors at play that you started to lay out. These undeclared voters, like Shaq said, can take a Democratic or Republican ballot. And throughout the day, I've been meeting people who've decided to vote for Haley for similar reasons to what you heard from Shaq there, mostly anti-Trump votes. And then some undeclared voters who've decided to participate in the Democratic write-in campaign for Joe Biden. Take a listen. Can you tell me, would you be willing to share who you cast your ballot for today?
Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley? Why Nikki Haley?
Because I think she's strong on foreign affairs, and I think she's a strong conservative.
Why not Donald Trump?
Because, as she says, chaos follows him, whether it's right or wrong, and I think that we're ready to move on.
If he becomes the nominee, would you vote for him in the general?
I will.
Your plan is to write in Joe Biden today?
Yes.
And what's the message you want to send with that?
I just think that, I don't know. I just think that it's important because he's probably the only one that stands a chance at possibly winning the election over Trump. But I honestly think it might go the other way, unfortunately.
Another conversation I had that really struck me, to Shaq's point of how late some people are making this decision, a gentleman told me that he walked in this morning initially thinking he was going to vote for Nikki Haley, but then at the last minute changed his vote for Trump because he thought about it and he felt like the primary was basically over. He felt like Trump was going to be the candidate, so he wanted to just vote for the guy that was going to win. So there is this sense of inevitability among some voters, and that, to me, is just a really steep hurdle for Nikki Haley to have to climb today. Jen?
It's so interesting to hear what voters are consuming from stump speeches and from ads, like the chaos line that was in one of those clips, and the inevitability argument that voter you just spoke to. So interesting. Shaq Brewster and Dasha Burns, thank you both so much. I know you're doing lots of reporting. We'll look forward to talking to you more later this evening. Let's bring in our panel here. MSNBC political analyst and writer-at-large for The Bulwark, Tim Miller, Democratic strategist and pollster, MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher, and with me here in Manchester, New York Times national political correspondent Lisa Lear, and professor in the Department of Politics at St. Anselm College here in New Hampshire, Christopher Galdieri. So there's a lot to dig into just about what these dynamics could look like. I'm going to start with you, Christopher, because you have covered a lot, you've watched a lot of these, you've written about New Hampshire primaries and politics. What this year feels the same? What feels different?
What feels different is that it all seems to be happening in just a slower gear. There are fewer candidates, fewer events. We didn't have debates in the last week. Trump has only been here. He's been commuting from his trials to give rallies in the evenings and on the weekends. Haley seemed to be going very slowly last week. So there's just been less of the, electricity in the air that you're used to feeling the weekend before primary day.
It's really interesting. Now, Lisa, you've been here reporting and covering things. Nikki Haley's coalition, we see this with voters. It feels like it's a combination of there are some people who are really excited about her. Mm-hmm. There are some people who are voting against Trump. There are some Democrats who are voting for her in the primary. What does a good coalition look like for her here?
Well, I think it's pretty much what you laid out. What she really needs is a surge of independent voters, or undeclared, as they call them here, to turn out to the polls and cast ballots for her. And I think what you're identifying is really true. This is, sure, people like Nikki Haley, but this is really an anti-Trump coalition. And what we've seen, throughout the years is that coalition does not hold a majority place in the Republican Party. The question is whether the unique dynamics of this state, where independent voters are about 40% of the electorate, change that and allow her to perhaps get a win, which people here seem to think is unlikely, or at least get a close second, which would allow her to, get some momentum and really make a case for herself to stay in this race.
It's going to be so interesting. A person who knows a lot about these sort of coalitions and numbers and data, we're going to bring in now Steve Kornacki, because we have our first look at the exit polling, and that may tell us some interesting things. So, Steve, what does it look like?
Yeah, Jen, keep in mind, this is the first wave. They are going to come in increments tonight, and obviously the voting still taking place for a few hours in New Hampshire. But what we're starting to get is a glimpse at what the electorate looks like today in New Hampshire. And there's a couple things in this first wave that I want to point out. First of all, we've talked so much about the role of independent voters, or the potential role of independent voters in this race. And I want to show you, we're asking how folks identify. This is not their actual on-the-record party registration. We don't have access to that. But we asked folks coming into the polls, do you identify as a Republican? Do you identify as a Democrat? Or do you identify as an independent? And here's what we found in this exit poll so far. And I think this jumps right out at you. A minority of voters in this first wave of the exit poll in the Republican primary identify as Republicans. A majority, 53%, identify as either independents, 45%, or, and this is a high number historically, 8% identify as Democrats. For some context here, in 2016, the last competitive Republican presidential primary in New Hampshire, the electorate was 55% Republican. It was 42% independent, and it was 3% Democratic. So in this initial wave, you're seeing some significant differences from 2016. One other item I want to point your attention to here is ideology. We asked folks, again, first wave here, are you somewhat conservative? Are you very conservative? Are you moderate? Or are you liberal? Now, take a look here. The moderate number checks in at 31%. The liberal number checks in at 6%. By comparison, so that's a total, 37% in this exit poll are identifying themselves in a Republican Party primary, are identifying themselves as moderate or liberal. The combined number 8 years ago, last competitive Republican primary in New Hampshire, was 29%. So this electorate, 8 percentage points more moderate and liberal, at least in this first wave of the exit polling, than it was 8 years ago. Also, the very conservative number was 26% 8 years ago. It sits at 24 here. That's more of a modest difference right there. But what you're seeing in this initial wave, what you're seeing is a lot of independents and a lot of folks who think of themselves as Democrats. And again, they're not actually registered Democrats right now. If they were, they couldn't participate in this primary. But they think of themselves as Democrats. That number, 8%, is very, very high. Historically, in a New Hampshire Republican primary, you're not going to see a number like that. So the combination right now in this first wave is majority non-Republican. Again, folks still voting. Exit poll, we're still going to add more waves to it. So that's sort of a baseline. That's a baseline here at 5 o'clock. And let's see how that plays out in the coming hours. And again, polls close most of the state at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Now, Steve, we obviously haven't seen any of the votes counted yet. The polls are still open. People are voting. But we were just talking about coalitions, and that makeup seems to be a good sign for Nikki Haley, given those are more the type of people who would potentially vote for her if you're looking at demographics and past polling. Or what is your thought on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've known all week, and I think the Haley campaign has made little secret of it that, they are relying here in New Hampshire disproportionately on independent voters, on non-Republican voters, on getting as many of them out and as getting a big share of them as they possibly can. The question of what share she's getting, is one that we will find out later, and we could talk about later. And again, we still need to see in this exit poll and ultimately as results start coming in at 7 o'clock. But certainly on paper, we just talked about, all week, is the independent turnout going to be higher? Is it going to be lower than 2016? Are there going to be folks who think of themselves as Democrats participating in this in meaningful numbers? Are they not? Are they going to be on the Democratic side doing the Biden write-in campaign? And again, I stress, it's the initial wave. There will be more exit poll data to come in the ensuing hours, and then there'll be the actual votes at 7 o'clock. But the initial wave shows you a composition of this New Hampshire Republican electorate that's a little different. It's frankly a lot different than we've seen before.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I know there's going to be lots of interesting data that comes in on issues, and we'll look forward to speaking with you about that as that comes in as well. Steve, thank you so much, and we'll see you throughout the night tonight.
Got it.
So those numbers are really interesting. Let me bring Tim and Cornell into this conversation, too, just to kind of talk to them a little bit about what that composition is. I think they're still there. We are, Tim and Cornell. So Tim, let me start with you. We can't get too ahead of ourselves in terms of what that means, right? But it is a higher percentage of people who are Democrats. It is a higher percentage, it seems, or a more solid percentage of independents. What is your assessment? What's your gut on what that means?
Well, I think it's modestly encouraging for Nikki Haley, and I think there are some things that we do know. We do know that there is a significant percentage of Democratic-leaning voters in New Hampshire who are considering strategically voting for Nikki Haley, but really more like against Trump in order to save our democracy. We know that because our reporters have talked to them in the field. We know that over at the Bulwark. We have a focus group session. We talked to New Hampshire voters, and there was one guy, Jen, who cited listening to David Plouffe on MSNBC talk about how maybe it makes sense to cross over and vote against vote for Nikki Haley against Donald Trump because of the threat to democracy. Okay, so it goes without saying that's not a typical Republican primary voter. Somebody that's listening to Obama's former campaign manager's advice on who they should strategically vote for. So those people exist. New Hampshire's a special place because they exist. I think there's some questions about the sustainability of that type of coalition, but I think that it's noteworthy that that's happening. And now we know that at least some percentage told exit pollsters that they went and did there. And I think just my final point on that is good on them, by the way. There's a lot of times we talk about how polarized we are and how, some Democrats are secretly rooting for Trump. Republicans make that accusation. I think it's cool that there are some New Hampshire Democrats that Nikki Haley's probably not their cup of tea, let's be honest. It's not like Chris Christie. It's not like a real moderate, but they're doing it because they think it's right for the country. And that's a little happy news for democracy on the early evening.
Tim, you're sometimes dark, so I'm happy that you're having a moment of light now. It feels good. I actually spoke to a voter today. We played it earlier, a young voter at the poll who said to me, I'm voting for Nikki Haley because I've heard that it may help if I do that and help defeat Donald Trump. It's like maybe he heard from the unofficial surrogate David Plouffe as well. We don't know. We don't know. He didn't mention him. Cornell, let me bring you into this conversation. You're an actual pollster, unlike not the rest of us. When you look at these numbers and kind of the makeup of the coalition, I mean, there could be Democrats who are helping Nikki Haley get across the finish line, could be independents. By finish line, I mean maybe finish better than what the polls are saying. What was your assessment of what you heard from those exit polls?
Well, a couple of things, sort of context. Well, first of all, we should, again, and Steve did this a little bit, is we should context it. Early exit polling, caution.
Important caution, yes.
Right, on early exit polling. But, if you're the Haley campaign to that point, you are, I think, you are a little emboldened. But also, this is what makes New Hampshire primaries so difficult to forecast, because look, you do have the ability for people to come in and out of a primary who are not necessarily likely primary voters, right? I think you have 16% from the early exit poll caution, 16% of these voters voting in a primary who say they hadn't voted in a primary before. So a lot of the predictions about what happens in New Hampshire and sort of polling in New Hampshire is so incredibly difficult, because it's hard to nail what a likely voting universe looks like, because you have this fluidity of who can vote and who can't vote. So New Hampshire is also a place where you can get surprises. Now the question is whether we'll get a surprise tonight. I think if this trend continues, where she is actually doing better with independent voters, which how much better with independent voters is she doing? If she's doing better with independent voters, she may have a chance of actually coming in closer in this election than I think a lot of us have predicted, simply because the dynamics and who's turning out and who's the likely universe in this election is changing. However, I will say to my friend's last point about this, I don't know how sustainable this is, because all the rest of the states, you don't have open primaries where Democrats and independents can cast an anti-Trump vote.
I mean, this is what makes it so interesting. We're going to keep this conversation going, so everybody hold their amazing thoughts. No one's going anywhere. And we're going to have much more with our panel after we take a quick break. And we're going to talk probably about what Nikki Haley hopes will be a stunning upset, what she needs to do as voting continues across the Granite State. Also ahead, Democrats are using a unique and untested and difficult, I will add, write-in campaign to boast President Biden here tonight. And if the twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president emerges victorious, is that the best scenario for the Biden-Harris re-election campaign? I think maybe it is. Our special coverage of the New Hampshire primary continues after a quick break. Stay with us.
Things have to change this year.
Can I ask who you cast your ballot for today?
Absolutely. I'm proud to say I voted for Trump.
So who did you cast your ballot for?
Nikki Haley. She's the only Republican left who's not Donald Trump.
Let's bring back our panel. Tim, Cornell, Lisa, and Christopher are all here back with me. So we were just talking about some of those exit poll numbers. With all the caveats, it's still interesting to kind of hear the early data on what this group of people voting today could look like. We've been talking a little bit today about kind of the feeling you get in the air when something is going to happen, right? Or there's going to be a shift and change, which is very imperfect and inexact. But you've been around for a lot of these. What has the last week felt like to you?
It's felt pretty quiet. It has not had the same sort of charge in the air you've had when somebody is really coming on strong, or where something is really happening. Bernie Sanders in 2016, or John McCain's runs in 2008 and 2000. This has felt very sort of quiet, low-key, but that might actually be working in Haley's favor. It might be the fact that people have been writing her off for days is triggering that instinct that a lot of New Hampshire voters have that, well, maybe we'll upset the conventional wisdom this year.
It's interesting. As Cornell's just saying, it's so hard to measure, which is what of course makes it interesting, so hard to predict. I think a big question going into tonight is, the latest tracking poll this morning had Haley down 22 points. So the question, if you ask her campaign, we saw the memo today, Chris Sununu, I had him on last night, and he said, oh, if she loses by 19, it's fine. Of course, she should stay in. But of course, there's conversations going on in a campaign right now. So what do you think? What does she have to do in order to stay in and really justify campaigning through to South Carolina?
I mean, ideally, she has to win. But I think the feeling you get, as you were saying, in the air is that that feels unlikely. When I talk to strategists in the state, there's a lot of conversation about whether she peaked too early, is she not hitting the moment right? So assuming she does not win, she has to be a very close second. And even then, there are real questions, as Cornell and Tim were saying in the previous panel, about her durability. What is the path forward? She is cobbling together a coalition here that is based on people, independents, maybe even some Democrats who cross lines. Those are not people who are voting in a Republican primary in most other states. So if she can't win enough support from actual Republicans, it's really hard to see how you go on to capture the Republican nomination. Now, how that plays out is whether donors will keep giving her enough money to keep doing this. If they feel like this isn't going anywhere, the money's going to turn off, and then you have a real problem.
Yeah, this is such an important point. I mean, we're just in the process here. So obviously, if it's a blowout, he's going to make the case. The Biden campaign may even make the case that this is what's happening. It's over. But there's a lot to happen from here, potentially, depending on the outcome. So, Tim, let's talk a little bit about Trump voters, because I think sometimes it's a misunderstood group of people. If you look at the data so far, even just in New Hampshire, he's winning, according to polls, people under 50. He's certainly winning working class voters. He's winning a lot of huge demographic groups. You've been following him. You've been to a lot of states. What do you think people are most miscalculating, misunderstanding? You can say specifically Democrats maybe misunderstanding about kind of Trump's following in the Republican electorate.
Well, I think a lot of it is, we've been like boiling in this Trumpian frog water for so long, you don't sort of realize what's happening around you, that it's been 9 years. It's been 8 years, right? So the types of people that are opting in to a Republican primary as a Republican, not the strategic Democrats we were talking about earlier, but the Republicans who are excited to vote in a Republican primary, Trump is what they know. Trump is what they're excited about. A lot of the types of people that are turned off by Trump have opted out of the Republican process. A lot of them voted last time in 2020 for Pete or Amy in the Democratic primary, right? Your college-educated suburban voters. So surprisingly, Trump is doing well with, like in Iowa, for example, in the suburbs. Well, that's not because suburban vote has totally pivoted and they're moving over to Trump. It's because the remaining suburban Republicans are still there because they like him, because he's been there for 8 years, and that's what they like about the party. And I think that's true also of young voters. Trump did very well with young voters in the polls. And I think that again, Democrats miss this, that if you're 25 and you're opting in to be a Republican right now, well, you were like 11 when Mitt Romney was running in 2012. Yeah. You don't know anything else. You're all in for this stuff. So I think that's why Trump's doing so well kind of across demos within the Republican coalition.
Yeah, it's so important to understand this, I think. I actually talked to a voter today in Manchester who was first-time voter, never voted before, obviously, voting for Trump because in his view, the economy was better under Trump. He was young. He was in college, right? So, it's kind of right in the pool of people you're talking about. Cornell, let me ask you a little bit about how President Biden's team might be looking at this. Because if you look at Nikki Haley's voters, obviously some of them are Democrats, and some of them will tell you they're voting for Nikki Haley, but they're going to support Joe Biden. So those are the most obvious targets, clearly. They don't even need to be targeted. But there's also the group of people. I mean, if you look at the Washington Post poll, which I know stuck out to the Biden campaign team, 81%, I believe, of Nikki Haley's supporters believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected in 2020, which to them, that's a ripe target. Do you think the Nikki Haley voters here, I know the bar is kind of low at this point, but it's important. Do you think those Nikki Haley voters, the people who are voting for her, if there's a blowout, are good, ripe targets for the Biden campaign?
I do, but let's talk campaigns, right? It comes down to resources, and what target group are you going to take off of the current Biden target table to put Republican Haley voters on that table and spend resources toward them? One of the things that boggles my mind so often, and I hear our colleagues and friends talk about this all the time, is how do we go after Republican voters and Trump voters and all this and that? And I keep looking back and I go, well, my God, the last 3 times someone's got to a majority in this country, it's been a Democrat building a Democratic coalition, right? Barack Obama got back-to-back majorities. Last time around, Biden got a majority and won by some 7 million votes, and it was more voters turnout than we've ever seen turnout before. So no, I don't actually give a damn about Republican voters. How about I care more about the Obama-Biden coalition and us winning and bringing back all those voters to Joe Biden that I'm worried about. And I don't mean to sound crass about this. I'm just being completely strategic. And from a resource
You're not being
standpoint,
crass at
I'm
all.
all about us building back that coalition, not bringing in more Republican voters. On the Republican side, they should be asking, how do we get some of these Democratic voters, not the other way around, because Democrats are actually garnering a majority.
Well, I mean, to your point, Joe Biden won 7 million more votes than Donald Trump 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago. So that's an important point for people to remember. The coalition building it's a tricky one, right? Because it's like, can you rebuild the Obama coalition without Obama? I'm sure we'll be discussing this a lot more. Tim Miller and Cornell Velcher, thank you both for spending some time with us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And the table sticks around. And when we return, President Biden isn't on the ballot here in New Hampshire, but that's not stopping a group of grassroots Democrats from trying to win him a big write-in victory tonight. We'll check in with NBC's Mike Memoli and the former campaign manager of the Obama-Biden 2012 re-elect campaign, Jim Messina, after a quick break.
I need to bring everything.
New Hampshire has long prided itself on being the first in the nation primary for both Republicans and Democrats. This year, Democrats decided to shake things up with their primary schedule to better align with the calendar with the electorate, opting to let South Carolina be the first to vote instead of Iowa or New Hampshire. But Democrats in the Granite State had a different idea. It's written into their constitution, and they decided that they're going to go first anyway. Voters won't see President Biden's name on the ballot today. Instead, they'll see his primary challengers and a space to write in his name. And if President Biden wins the symbolic primary today, it will be because of a write-in campaign led by grassroots Democrats. Not an easy thing to do. Here's how NBC described that campaign. Quote, President Biden's allies are now waging what has to be one of the most unusual campaigns in American presidential history. A write-in campaign with a shoestring budget on behalf of the most powerful man in the world, no pressure, trying to help him win a contest in which he is not technically competing and one which he would rather see not even exist. That is quite an assignment, I think it's fair to say. Joining us now is NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli in Portsmouth. And Mike, you've been covering this very closely. That is quite a description and a setup. But give us a sense of the write-in campaign, how it's going. It's grassroots run. So what's going on across the state about this write-in campaign over the last couple of days?
Well, Jen, the word that has been used most often to describe this write-in effort is weird, right? Because when the filing period for the ballot here closed in late October, this write-in campaign didn't even exist. The paperwork hadn't been filed. They hadn't been raising money. So they've had less than 3 months to try to raise what little money they can, to try to get an organization together, and then to try to use that organization to reach voters across the state. So fast forward now, we spent most of the last 3 days at some of the house parties, at some of the sign wavings, at some of the grassroots trainings that this write-in effort was doing. And the organizers felt very good that they had pulled this together in just enough time, a campaign without a candidate. A candidate, by the way, the President of the United States, who hasn't even visited New Hampshire since April of 2022. I talked to a voter here at this ward, which is one of the more Dem-heavy wards in the state, who actually complained to me that she was getting too much mail from the write-in campaign. So that's all well and good. Will that actually translate to success here for the president tonight? And when you talk to everyone, whether they're involved or whether they're a critic of the president in the party, if they're upset about the decision he made to elevate South Carolina, they really can't give you a number of what they think is successful for him. So we need to look at history. It's 1968. President Johnson wasn't on the ballot. Eugene McCarthy, senator, was running an anti-war campaign. He came within about 6 to 8 points of Lyndon Johnson. That was seen as a big blow to his electoral prospects. And in fact, President Johnson bowed out, decided not to seek a second term just a few weeks later. So that's kind of the informal number you get in terms of what looks like success for him. But I think a lot of that will also depend on what we see on the Republican side, because if we are counting votes and watching the margin between Trump and Haley late tonight, then maybe we're not paying as close attention to what that write-in number is either. So we'll have to wait for maybe another hour or so until the polls close and we get our first clues.
I think the Biden campaign would be thrilled about that if people weren't paying as much attention. A couple Democrats have told me 50 plus 1, it's fine. I also wanted to ask you while I have you about Dean Phillips. He's running, he's on the ballot. You spent some time with him. I believe he said something today like it's the best day of his life or some version of that, so at least he's having a good time. But what is he hoping for tonight?
Well, I interviewed him a couple days ago. He said that if he got in the 20% range, that would be tremendous, was his word. But it's also been interesting as he's been campaigning across the state here that he's also been sort of ruling out, but then opening the door at the same time to a possible third-party run. Maybe he would join a no-labels effort if this primary challenge is unsuccessful. And so as I talk to other Democrats here, they say if he was running about issues, if he was talking about his vision for the country, why he would be a better president than Joe Biden, then maybe he would be getting a little bit more traction. But so much of his argument has been about process, has been about what the DNC did, has been about, frankly, the president's age and other liabilities, which is not something that Democrats want to hear about. And so when I described to one of the supporters of the write-in effort here that Dean Phillips had told me he was going to wage this campaign all the way to the convention in Chicago, she simply responded that he's dreaming. So that's a sense of how they view it here.
Okay, sick burn from the supporter. Mike Melling, thank you for spending some time with us. I'm sure we'll talk to you more later this evening. Let's bring into our conversation Jim Messina, campaign manager for Obama's 2012 re-election campaign, my former boss, political wonderkind. No pressure, Jim. So let's just talk about, there's a lot of dynamics going on in New Hampshire. I mean, New Hampshire is traditionally a swing state. The president is 7 points ahead of Donald Trump right now in the recent polls. Nikki Haley's actually beating him in the recent polls for whatever that means in New Hampshire. He's not on the ballot. They're not really acknowledging the write-in campaign. It's run by the grassroots. That's my laydown. But what is a win for the president coming out of tonight?
Well, look, first of all, I think it's super cool that these folks are organizing on their own. I mean, that's why you and I are Democrats.
Yeah.
It's exciting. The fact that they're doing this, they have no paid staff. They're doing, they're doing their own thing. I love that people are already complaining they're getting too many pieces of mail from a campaign with no money. I mean, that is just bizarre to me, but super fun. Look, what Joe Biden and the Biden campaign need is Dean Phillips to go away and not have any momentum. And Dean Phillips is not going to have any momentum. He's been running for months. He's still running in the single digits. He's about to get trounced by a guy not on the ballot. And a couple weeks ago, Jen, he had a rally that literally no one attended. 0 people attended. He couldn't even get his mom to go to the rally. So the fact is this campaign is over, and the Democrats are just going to watch to see the more important stuff of what comes out of the Republican primary tonight.
I mean, maybe his mom wasn't available, to be fair, but I hear your point. I hear what you're saying. Let's talk about the general election for a second, because we don't know what the outcome is going to be tonight, but we could be quite close to that. So let me read from Axios this morning on what many Democrats may want to see out of New Hampshire. Donald Trump wants a big win in New Hampshire on Tuesday to effectively end the GOP presidential primary. Many Democrats are rooting for the same thing. President Biden's team believes that Trump becoming the presumptive Republican nominee for president would give a much-needed jolt of energy to voters and grassroots donors who don't want to see Trump back in the White House. Now, this is very consistent with what I've heard from the Biden campaign, that one of their challenges and their frustrations right now is the percentage of people who don't believe that Trump is going to be the nominee. And if it becomes clear, that's actually good for them. But what's your thought on that?
Well, Jen, you heard me say this to Barack Obama several times. If it's a choice, if it's a referendum on the incumbent, usually the incumbent loses. But if it's a choice between the campaigns, usually the incumbent wins. And the best choice, the best difference is with Donald Trump. Donald Trump just gives you something the other Republican candidates just don't give you, which is 2 things. Number one, he's helpfully running around the country bragging that he got rid of Roe v. Wade, which is democracy coming up here as well, which motivates people on the Democratic side. We've had massive turnout in recent elections since Donald Trump's come to power because he's such a motivating factor for Democrats. So just as a sheer contrast, if you're a campaign manager for the President of the United States, Donald Trump just gives you those things that no one else gives you.
Yeah, he's quite a foil for the Biden team, I think it's fair to say, and they've run against him before. Jim Messina, thank you for spending some time with us. Look forward to continuing to talk with you about this as we move toward the general election at some point. We need to fit in a quick break, but we'll be back with our panel here in New Hampshire. Our coverage continues right after this. We are back from Manchester, New Hampshire, and with us now, Washington Post political columnist Karen Tumulty. So I'm going to come to you in a moment, Karen. I need to get your text, too, that you've been sending out to voters. We're going to talk about that in a second. But, Lisa, you were part of a team that just broke some pretty significant news about the Biden campaign, so tell us about that.
We just broke that Jen O'Malley Dillon, who is, of course, a major player in the White House, is going to come over and help with the campaign operations. This is certainly showing that they're shifting to the general election, that they're starting to get much more in election mode. It's also sort of a response in some ways, maybe implicitly, to a lot of criticism that we've all been hearing from Democrats over the past 6 months or a year that really run the gamut. There's concerns about the messaging, whether they're focusing too much on democracy and Trump and not enough on the economy and what Biden has done, or abortion, these other issues. There's concerns about staffing. There's been some reporting that President Obama has even weighed in with some concerns. So, this is a sign that the Biden team is really moving into re-election mode and that they're starting to dump more resources into this campaign.
Yeah, it's a really, Jen O'Malley Dillon, of course, who I know pretty well, is she ran the campaign, the last campaign in 2020, where Joe Biden, of course, defeated Donald Trump. She's been the deputy chief of staff in the White House for the last couple of years.
And she was the one who was brought in as campaign manager when they really needed to take the campaign and shape it up and get it in the kind of shape it needed to be for a general election campaign. She really did a remarkable job.
And her superpower, everybody has a superpower, is field organizing and really organizing state by state and all that data and turnout numbers that you really need to inspire voters and inspire grassroots campaigns to move forward. So that's a very interesting development. I know you had help on it. You were part of the team. Very important.
And also, what it really also indicates is how weak they are with their coalition, because you're bringing in someone who specializes in field at a time when they have to, there's clear problems that the Biden campaign has with young voters, with liberal voters that need to be fixed if they're going to win.
I think from talking to them a fair amount about this, one of the things they see as an opportunity is Trump being the nominee.
Yeah,
and they feel very strongly, we'll see if this plays out this way, of course, and it may over the next couple of weeks, that once it's clear that Trump is the nominee, if Trump becomes the nominee, that will help them because people will wake up to the reality. And I know, Karen, we were just talking about this because never historically, right, has it been locked up this quickly by someone who's not a sitting president?
That's right. If things tonight go the way the polls suggest they're going to go, yeah, we are now in the general election, and this is earlier than any campaign I certainly can think of in modern times. And it is, at this point, Trump is going to be able to sort of consolidate all the fundraising, all the state parties, all the organizational infrastructure, and it is going to be the longest, grimmest general election campaign I think that any of us can remember.
It sounds optimistic. We have to be very truth-telling here, which is important. Christopher, let me ask you, because, we are still, polls are still open right now. People are still voting. What kind of New Hampshire surprises could happen tonight? Tell us a little about the history.
We could see that the early exit polls really do capture a huge surge in independents. We could see Haley make huge inroads amongst conservative Republicans, self-identified Republicans, who might be disaffected with Trump, or who think, maybe there should be a choice. Maybe we shouldn't coronate Trump after just the first two contests. So I think, with those numbers, maybe there's a possibility that happens. On the Democratic side, I think everyone in the state party and everyone in the White House, for different reasons, are hoping nobody notices, that just the president wins and we can all forget about it, and then the New Hampshire Democratic Party can try to protect the primary for 2028.
We will see if that happens. In our seconds left, tell us how, if people want to get your texts, how do they get them?
You can find the link on the Washington Post website, and it's really, my texts are really just a new way of trying to connect with readers and sort of bring them along on the campaign.
That's exciting. I'm going to be getting myself on that text list, and I'm looking forward to doing exactly that. Well, there's a lot we're going to continue to cover tonight. I'm so grateful for all of you on the panel for being here. Christopher, thank you so much. Lisa, I know, continue to do reporting, break lots of news. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to getting your texts. I really appreciate you all joining me. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Coming up at the top of the hour, Rachel Maddow and all of your MSNBC primetime friends will be here to take us through this night. Polls closing in most places in just over an hour and statewide at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay with us for all the results and excitement.